some behind the scenes. People don't always ask, how do you get these weird shots? This one's kind of tricky. It looks like it's just floating there and rotating, but it's not really on the floor. It's staged. Oh, I know, that takes away a lot of the magic, doesn't it? The rotating base, remember that? And this is just some scrap flooring. The tricky shot that I'm surprised nobody asks about is the one with the coconut bowls. There were like coconut go bowls, and in it the camera kind of goes around like this, and I had to make this goofy apparatus. It wasn't that bad, but it required some tinkering and some cleverness. Go check that one out. You know what is a lovely feeling? That feeling of completion when you just finish a really long project that's just been taking its toll on you. The longer a project goes on for, the more you have invested in it, and the more it feels that there's a lot at stake. You know, it just takes on this feeling of urgency and you just can't wait for it to end. Well, I'm experiencing that moment of calm now that I have this posted. The game is called 40 Bridges, and if you're watching this, it means that this should be available on my main channel now. But with this project, it's slightly different from most. And to those of you who have been with me for a while, I'm pretty sure that I've expressed this before with Isopath. I have this concern with the game being potentially unoriginal or derivative. That's not to say that I have any reason to believe that it is. I think it's an original property, but let me explain. Consider the case of Easter Island. The first people to populate that island that we know of got there around something like 1,000 years ago. Excuse me if my numbers are slightly off, but I'm recalling this from the top of my head. But approximately 1,000 years ago, they arrived in the middle of nowhere, this island that's just far away from everything. And the place was likely a paradise, and they populated it, and things were lovely. For something like another several hundred years, they were completely uninterrupted, and they just had this wonderful place to live in. They eventually exhausted their resources and were forced into cannibalism. And if you've never heard this story, my goodness, you need to head over to the Wikipedia page right away. It's quite a fascinating story. Quite the ecological warning as well. But anyhow, my point here is that we have hundreds of years of human history in this place with thousands of people over many generations where their entire story is completely forgotten. It's just been erased by the sands of time, replaced by time. We have no idea what happened there. And so if you consider the many lives that have gone in and out of existence in just that one small South Pacific island, consider the vast expanse of human history and the collective achievement and knowledge that has passed through human consciousness and then faded into oblivion. All we've been doing for so long is playing with sticks and stones in the sand and mud. And that's the nature of game. What I mean to say here is that it would be totally arrogant to think that any of my games would be entirely original. So I make them with no knowledge of other games that are similar to them. But nevertheless, I recognize the possibility. And so when you're releasing something like this as though it were an original intellectual property to a mob of many people, thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands, there's a potential there for serious embarrassment if it were to turn out that this already exists. And a game like 40 Bridges is not that complicated in its essence. You just have 2 overlapping checkerboards and 8 pieces. So those people on Easter Island, if they were bored enough, why wouldn't they have been able to devise a game like this? And I'm certain that they did, but was it this game? Probably not. But could this exact same idea have been invented somewhere else along the vast expanse of human history? Certainly so. There's nothing really new under the sun. Nevertheless, 40 Bridges, the video, was a top quality video production. I really stand by it. I think you'll find some value in it, even if you don't like games, and even if the game turns out to be totally derivative, which I don't think is the case. But anywho, this thing here, what we're looking at, is an early prototype for the earliest version of the game where the bridges were actually bridges. So imagine that the bridges are the lines that connect the squares. We would have been making 40 of these and arranging them into a grid, and it would have been a 3-dimensional play structure where the square pieces were up on the bridges and the octagonal pieces would be down in the little courtyards there in between them. Obviously, I simplified the game for a couple of reasons. Reason number 1, so that everybody else can play it. Reason number 2, the structure was complex to build and unnecessarily so. While it would have added visual appeal, you would have really had to fumble to move the pieces under the bridges. And so it really, even though it was a cool idea, it never made it past the prototype stage. So what you see here in the finished product is a really streamlined and simplified version of what some of the original ideas for the game were. Releasing a game for me, and I've expressed this sentiment to you before, to those of you who have been around for a while. I can say this to you because we know each other well enough by now. I find it stressful. It's one of my more personal creations that I'm hesitant to give away. And 40 Bridges is the least of those. I still have several other finished games, 2 of which are phenomenal, and 1 is simply a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned in terms of complexity and gameplay. And it's extremely unlikely that it's ever been invented before. And so I have this apprehension about releasing it to the public for nothing, and it's a bit of a conundrum that makes me feel rather strange because I feel selfish for wanting to keep it to myself, and at the same time I feel as though I should be compensated for releasing it. And so I've been procrastinating on its release, the other 2 games, not just this. This is the simplest of the 3 that I'm talking about, but the other 2 I'm really procrastinating on because it just feels wrong to give them away. I'm so sorry to admit that. This one I wanted to give away now because anybody can make it, and this is a great time to be playing board games. I'm aware that my tone here is whiny, and for that I don't want to apologize, but I would instead ask you to try to understand why. Because I'm so heavily invested in something mentally, I release it expecting it to just change the world, right? And it doesn't. Isopath was, I wouldn't say a failure, but it was not as well received as I would have liked it to have been. For this one, I have rather lukewarm expectations, but we'll see how it goes. Nevertheless, it's a really easy game. It's easy to make. I would totally recommend that you go check it out. I'll put a link to the main video here. Of course, you don't have to pay anything, so there are really no strings attached for you to try it out. And if you've ever played any board game, it's nice. It's a little more complicated than checkers, but not by much. And it has a substantial amount more complexity than checkers. But it's no chess replacement. But stay tuned. One way or another, the games that I really do want to release, that I'm so passionate about, I totally want to share them with you in the future. Okay, thanks for listening. I just appreciate you letting me get those strange concerns, rather selfish strange concerns, off of my chest. And one more thing about 40 bridges. Oops. I mentioned in the video that the idea started on the bathroom floor, and I know that's how the story goes with Hex, and I wasn't just saying that, I really did think of it in the shower. It seems that my most clear thinking happens in the shower. I don't think that's entirely coincidental. I think when you're in the shower, you're in a warm, comfortable, relaxed environment, and the key to really, really, really forcing creativity out is to be in a relaxed state. If we're under pressure or any other type of incentive to move creativity forward, it just doesn't work as well. So, how do you rotate about 2 coconut bowls without seeing footsteps or jerkiness? I'm glad you asked. You suspend something with a counterbalance from the ceiling. This is where my camera attaches. This is my usual tripod thingy. This is an old motor, and because it works with bearings, it rotates nicely, and it's just suspended from the ceiling. Now, this long piece of PVC here, it's about 6 or 7 feet. It's resting on a piece of memory foam to help balance the mass out. And here it is in motion.